Hello and welcome to Town Planning themed Room 101, which is the penultimate entry for this year's series of Room 101 events. My name is Kim Cooper. I'm chair of the RTPI for the North West region, and this is actually my final event as chair as well, I think, handing over to a colleague next year. So this is a great one to end on. I just wanted to take the time to welcome Sue Manns, who's the RTPI president. This is part of Sue's virtual regional visit to the North West region, so thank you to Sue. And as I won't be popping back on at the end to speak either, I do want to thank Bob for all of his efforts in arranging these Room 101 series. He's been fantastic in organising and chairing everything. So I will dip off. No pressure at all, Bob. I will dip off, but thank you to Bob. And I'll leave it to him to introduce all of our speakers. Have fun.
Thanks, Kim. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the final one in our current series, unless anybody wants to take it on next year, of our Room 101 series, or Planning Room 101. My name is Bob Phillips. If you haven't met me before, I'm a lecturer at the University of Manchester, and I run a small planning and design company in Macclesfield. If you have met me before, as I always say, I apologise again. This evening we've got 4 speakers who are going to challenge each other to be the one to put an element of the current planning system into Room 101. So as I welcome each of them this evening, can you give us a wave or a thumbs up or something? So in the order which they'll run in this evening, John Groves of Groves Town Planning. Hi, John. Rachel Hacking from Rachel Hacking Ecology, our resident ecologist this evening. President of the RTPI and of Sue Manns, as you know. And finally, Sam Stafford from Barratt Homes. Hi, Sam. Oh, I think he's probably frozen. Hopefully we'll get him back in a few minutes. So, everybody, welcome to tonight. What I do want to stress very clearly is that all of our speakers are going to speak tonight. The views are their own. They don't represent the particular company. I've asked them to talk as planners first and as members of their respective companies and organisations second. I've asked them also to be potentially a little bit controversial. We'll see how they're feeling. And to make sure that really they're making us think a little bit more widely about how we're operating as planners. And that's the big thing that we've been finding is in this Room 101 series, that actually sometimes it's good to take a step back and have a look at really the way that we're functioning as town planners and what it is we're trying to achieve. For those of you that are not familiar with the Room 101 format, I will give you a brief outline of how this evening's going to run. The first thing to say is each of our speakers will have up to 5 minutes, of which I will time, to try and pitch an idea, an element of the current UK planning system that they would like to put into Room 101 or consign to the dustbin, for want of a better term. We will hear each of them in turn, and the panel of the 5 of us will perhaps have a little bit of banter and discussion in between each of our speakers, before we move to the end of the event, whereby there is an opportunity for audience participation. So if, as you're going through tonight, you have questions for any one of our speakers, please can you put them into the chat? And at the very end of having heard all of our 4 speakers this evening, we'll take a bit of time to answer some questions from the audience. The other thing that we will do is we'll put up a poll and allow you, members of our RTPI virtual family, as it were, to vote and give me your opinion on what you think of the 4 items we're discussing this evening should be consigned into Room 101. Just to put into context the sessions that we've had before, we put constant government tinkering into Room 101, and we've also managed to put in local authority planning websites into Room 101. 2 things that annoy me equally well. I will point out that as the host, the final decision is mine. The judge's decision is final, and I'm very sorry for any inconvenience that may cause anybody. Anyway, Without further ado, I will introduce each of my speakers and allow them to tell you a little bit more about themselves before they launch into their 5-minute missive. So our first speaker this evening, because we're going to go in alphabetical order by surname, Mr. John Groves. Please, over to you.
Thanks, Bob. My item for Room 101 is planning committees. I didn't know what to say, but I do love letters to agony aunts in newspapers, and by pure chance there was a relevant one in the Sunday papers this weekend. So forgive me, but I'm going to read this letter that somebody wrote to an agony aunt in one of the Sunday papers. Dear Deirdre, I used to love planning committees. Our relationship began in my mid-20s when working with a local authority with area committees with full decision-making powers. It was love at first pre-committee briefing. I know some thought the relationship to be strange, but I love the buzz, the professional and personal challenge. I was learning and developing as a planner and a person, even when the chair told me off for saying that something could not be almost unique, and that a brick building could not be dilapidated, as the term derives from the Latin lapis, which means stone. It taught me to consider the approach to presenting a recommendation to committee and to understand the information that members needed to make sound decisions. I built a great relationship with the chair, one of mutual respect, where he could point out issues which hindered rather than help members, and where he would listen to advice on the planning process and support when others questioned. The committee made planning different. We were in front of members more than other directors and chief officers. No one in highways, building control, environmental health had to present before councillors. A planner's decision was tested in public, a truly democratic process. Yes, it was sometimes parochial, we had disagreements, and sometimes the wrong decisions were made. I don't know the point at which we started to drift apart. Maybe it was the 2 occasions I had to call the police to remove unruly customers. Maybe it was the councillor who started to bring her knitting to planning committee. Maybe it was the strange quirk in one council's standing orders, which said that once a planning committee started, it had to finish, resulting in a discussion about a mobile classroom at 1 o'clock in the morning. Maybe it was the fact that a great friend, a planning consultant, suspected that she would get more favourable decisions by wearing the right dress. I'm pleased we've moved on from that. But we've drifted apart even more in the recent past. It's now so obvious that few members read committee reports. I've seen members not even knowing where a site was, that was on a major scheme, and presenting their case refusing an application which was 2 items further on in the agenda. Officers now feel the need to present applications, unnecessary if the report had been read by members, and officers cannot just highlight a couple of key issues, but are compelled to read out a statement. Not their fault. Officers need to make sure that their advice is not open to challenge or provides a chink of an issue to be exposed by a councillor's appeal. These presentations are often delivered at the same pace as the terms and conditions on a radio advert for a car lease. Little or no notice is taken of 3-minute presentations from either side, and woe betide anyone who tries to make a point of clarification. The public do not understand the process or how a decision has been reached. Members do not discuss and challenge, but make statements, obviously prepared in many cases, one after the other. It's not debate or exploration of issues, but often narrow, ill-informed opinion. I spent 30 minutes the other week at a virtual committee listening to members counting the number of schools on the route from a small industrial development, which generated 10 vehicle movements a week, to the strategic network. No discussion on the key issues which have been highlighted by officers. Officers were obviously instructed not to engage in the debate. The reason for refusal had nothing to do with the discussion. A few neighbours were happy, but it was not a good decision, and more importantly, not a good process to reach the decision. It's just not like it was in the beginning, and that's not nostalgia. We've not grown old together, we've just grown apart. Please help me find some love again. To quote Sondheim, there's a place for us, a time and a space for us, somewhere, somehow, sometime. Desperate of Warrington. And that's it. Somebody else summed that up for me. I can't think who would write that sort of letter, but they did. And thank you very much to them.
Thank you for that, John.
Bob.
I was going to say that letter probably could have come from me, except for the fact that it said 30 years in it, and I'm not quite that old. Despite
baby.
But yeah, no, thank you. Wonderfully presented. It evoked a number of different things in my mind.
I didn't say 30 years either. You made that up.
I was particularly interested in the point that you made about the fact that it's moved from being somewhere where you debate the issues to act as it perhaps traditionally had been as a planning committee, and it had moved to this more of people saying pre-prepared statements and sort of flouting opinion one after the other in a row. And I sympathise and recognise that with planning committees quite a bit. And I think whoever wrote your wonderful letter, I think couched that particularly well. Other members of our panel, any thoughts on what John said? Do you want to try and shoot him down? Do you want to try and support what he said?
I support what he says, actually.
Thanks for that, Rachel. And the box is ticked. Sam, you gesticulated.
Planning committees are, how did I describe them on one of my podcasts? Cauldrons of human emotion. They're more observed than I find in soap operas, if you've got nothing to do on an evening. On a serious point, however, I do think that of much in the white paper we can't get away from that was perhaps misguided a little bit. The idea of getting fewer applications to planning committee where the principle has been established upstream, I think is no bad thing. If we're talking technical, serious points, just for a minute. Unnecessary member interference, yes. Planning committees as a whole, they're such great fun as long as you're observing and you haven't got an application actually on the agenda.
I think interesting. You want to come back, John?
Yeah, I was just going to say, I'm not saying we should get rid of planning committees altogether, but I think to go back to that place where the committee had a meaning and was understandable by the public in particular, and where the right things were being discussed rather than just doing things by rote. Everybody's scared of saying anything that somebody might pick up on and challenge later on. And I think some of that might be doing it exactly as Sam's just said. It's refining what we do at committee. And I have the little dream that perhaps a committee would be much more like a hearing in front of an inspector, and you'd have a really limited number of items going forward so that you could have that round the table discussion a little bit more. Obviously you need to control it, and you couldn't have 500 people wanting to speak on applications, but wouldn't it be really nice if there was that round the table discussion, and an objector could put their point across and be sensibly questioned by members to understand exactly where they're coming from and to understand their point of view.
Sue, I'm going to, you've asked, and if we make this the last point before we move on.
Yeah, if I make it very, very quick. I think for me, one of the biggest challenges for planning committees everywhere is diversity. Simple point, they aren't, and they need to be. They need to reflect the society that they're actually taking the decisions on behalf of.
That's an interesting point to make, yes. So perhaps we're not consigning planning committees per se into the into Room 101. We're perhaps consigning our traditional notions of that as we see it enshrined in today's planning system. One of the things I did forget before I introduced John and introduced his topic, I've chosen an image that to represent you. I've chosen this one for you, John. This is the only one I ever use when I talk about planning committees. There it is, the Vicar of Dibley and the parish council there. So that's your image. Excellent.
No. Yes.
They are
Thank
really
you very much, John. If we can move on to our next speaker. Our next speaker, as I say, we're going in alphabetical order this evening. And we move to Rachel Hacking, Rachel Hacking Ecology. I'll let her introduce herself and her topic a little bit more. All I'm going to say is that Rachel's dealing with the issue of biodiversity net gain. And because I don't really understand it and think it's about maths, I've decided that this is your image.
Good Lord.
Rachel, lots of maths.
That's about what it is.
And as a planner, I'm always very scared of maths. So I'll let you introduce your topic and yourself a little bit more, and the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Bob. I am also terrified of maths, and I think this is partially why I have decided to consign biodiversity net gain to Room 101, and I hope you'll agree. So don't get me wrong, I think it's a wonderful idea, and I think that we are losing biodiversity in the UK at a phenomenal rate. And I do think that development sites have the opportunity here to enhance ecology of the local area and provide, yes, biodiversity enhancement. But I'm consigning biodiversity net gain to Room 101 in its current incarnation because it is an absolute mess, and it is a royal pain in the proverbial for planners, for ecologists, for local authority ecologists, for local authority planners, for landscape architects. And I think that's because it's being retrospectively applied to sites in many, many instances. So what we currently have is biodiversity net gain has been suggested, and it's going through the Environment Bill as we speak, and whenever it becomes mandatory, we're supposed to be able to provide 10% biodiversity net gain on sites. Well, inherently, I think that the majority of development sites, it's going to be very difficult to get 10% net gain because you're automatically replacing green habitats with buildings, with roads. And I am passionate about the fact that we need housing in this country. I'm passionate about the fact we need good infrastructure and good employment opportunities. But I also think that we should be enhancing development sites. I just don't think at the moment this is the right way to do it. So we have this calculator called the Deframetric 2, which some local authorities decided to use. We also have a Warwickshire calculator, which is a different way of calculating it. And the calculators, whichever calculator the local authority asks you to use, it's very, very strict, it's very rigid. All that you can input into this calculator are your existing habitats and your proposed habitats, and you cannot tell the calculator anything else. And the calculator then churns out this figure at the end, this number that says you've got so many biodiversity units that you're losing, and you're either in a percentage of net loss or you're in a percentage of net gain. So we have these very rigid figures. On top of that, if the site's in net loss, which 99% of sites tend to be at the moment because it's being retrospectively applied, you have to work out a commuted sum to offset that net loss. And every local authority at the moment has a very different idea of how much that commuted sum should be. So in the North West, we have local authorities that say it should be around £10,000 per biodiversity unit of loss. You move 5 metres over the border and you're into hundreds of thousands of pounds per unit of loss. So how is that right? How can it be that we can have development sites where the same amount of net loss is calculated so differently across the board? And I work across the UK, and I can tell you that every local authority is scrabbling around at the moment, trying to get net gain into policy, trying to get net gain into their requests for planning applications. You've either got to provide 10% net gain or no net loss. You've got to use a different number of calculators. There's all these commuted sums being wafted around, and it's very, very confusing. And don't get me wrong, there's lots of ways that you can enhance a site, and it should be looked at holistically. not just whatever number comes out of that calculator, that number crunching. We should be looking at bat boxes, bird boxes, and those wonderful little hedgehog holes that we all seem to be so keen on at the moment. Not just what the calculator is saying, but no, there's so much rigidity with this calculator and the number that it throws out, that I just find it really frustrating. We design lots of nice ecological enhancements onto site, and yet we get this number at the end of it. And so it's frustrating. It's not the way to go about it, I don't think. And as soon as it's standardized, brilliant. But I think 10% net gain is a little bit too high to reach. I think we'd be better off with 5% or no net loss. And it does worry me for retrospectively applying it, and I just think it's the wrong way to calculate a development site and what it brings to the local biodiversity and local ecology. So that's why I am putting biodiversity net gain into Room 101 in its current incarnation.
Thanks for that, Rachel. Wonderful. Bev has just been speaking in my little shell-like and has told me that I forgot to tell you all, ladies and gentlemen of the audience, that if you have questions for our panel, you can leave them in the chat or the questions function within the GoToMeeting, and they will be reported to me in a roundabout fashion, ready for our question and answers. But yes, thank you for that, Rachel. That was really interesting. Interesting that not the principle of net gain or improving biodiversity, but it's more about the metric and this fact that we're trying to quantify it in such a way that seems to be your issue.
That's right.
And that's a really interesting departure. You know, I've spoken to a lot of people in the planning world who are saying this is a completely unreasonable thing to ask us to do. And actually it isn't about saying it's unreasonable, it's about saying actually the measure that we're using is not the best way of achieving improvements or enhancements to biodiversity.
I mean, it really affects viability of sites as well, Bob. So, you know, you've got sites that have already entered into agreements with landlords, you've got viability arguments, and then to suddenly find out really down the line that you've got to pay £300,000 to offset the biodiversity loss, it's just crazy. You know, and these are on sites where it's 100% affordable housing. It's just ridiculous.
Do we? I'm looking at my other members of my panel and their thoughts. Have you used biodiversity? Has it worked well? Has it not worked, Sue?
I love it. I absolutely love it. And the reason I love it is because I've got an application in at the moment where I have got 43% net biodiversity gain. Now think about my planning balance. I mean, how else would you get that?
That's brilliant, Sue. It's so rare though, but that's fantastic.
Oh, yeah, we absolutely love it. It really helps.
John, waving at me.
Have we not had it? Have we not had it the other way already, though? That because it's been in the MPPF that sites should secure biodiversity and net gain, and that I don't think that's worked because it's never referred to. Nobody ever determines planning applications based on that. So maybe we need that other regime rather than the one which just says it's a consideration and it's here and you've got to think about it.
Yeah, totally agree, John. I think we do need to enhance development sites, definitely. But it's just the way that it's done at the moment. It's the inconsistency, basically, that we don't know how to calculate that commuted sum, and everyone wants different calculations. So that's it, really. But yeah, I agree. I think we definitely need to enhance development sites, and there's lots and lots of ways to do it, not just crunching numbers.
It's really interesting about the relationship that the planning system has with numbers, full stop. And I remember the MPPF in 2012 coming out, and the whole housing numbers when the circumstances changed with local authority. If you don't have a 5-year housing land supply, all bets are off, sort of thing. And the change in the way that we suddenly started to look at planning applications changed almost overnight, quite incredibly. And whether there's the issue that if we introduce this biodiversity net gain, it makes it numerical, it runs through, suddenly the importance of biodiversity suddenly rockets up our importance list. yes, it's an interesting one. I'm glad we have people like you, Rachel, and perhaps you, Sue, who know how to use it.
Well, I know how to use it. It's a fine line there, Bob, because it's just so complicated. But yeah, we're getting there.
Superb. Thank you very much, Rachel. We'll move on to our third speaker. As I say, for those of you that don't know Sue, you've been living under a rock for a year. Sue is our current president of the RTPI. I must stress, however, that she speaks tonight with her hat on as a personal planner, not representing the views of the RTPI. I'm going to let Sue introduce her topic properly herself, and I understand you've got a visual aid that Bev will put up at the appropriate juncture. But in my particular low-tech way, I've chosen an image to describe yours, and I've chosen this picture of four relatively arguing vultures who all have a different opinion and don't make a decision, and all ask each other what they want to do. And perhaps when you introduce yours, it might make it clearer to our audience why I've chosen that picture. So over to you, Sue.
Right, thank you very much, Bob. So the phrases, and they're phrases that I want to send to Room 101, are phrases like, we all think the same, or the community view is. So that's what I'd like to send to Room 101. So I do get frustrated when I hear people in my local area say, we all think the same, or I read in the local press that the community are united in their opposition, when I haven't told anyone what I think. Maybe they've just taken my silence as agreeing with them. Well, it isn't. It just means that I don't have strong enough views either way to give up my precious time to write them down. Those responding to planning consultations are expressing their views, not mine. Our views may overlap, they may not, but nothing infuriates me more than when people say we all think the same. Views are shaped by background and the experiences of those expressing them. And more often than not, they also reflect the social groups of which an individual is part. And our social lives are to some extent an echo chamber. We tend to mix with people who are similar to us, who share our views on various topics, or who've come together through a shared interest. For me, it's planning and mountaineering. But hearing people tell us what we already know makes us feel good. And when people confirm our views, we feel even better. The problem is, because our friends and social circles share many of our views, we assume that everyone else does too, and it's simply not the case. We all use spaces and places around us, and we all do it in very different ways. And what's more, our views and the way we use those spaces and places changes as our lives change. How many of us on occasion wince at our parents' views? But have you ever thought about how you've changed through your life? And I'm sure you'll also agree with me when I say that even within families, there will be different views on things. So, for example, if you were to ask the 5 people in my household which is the best football team in Birmingham, the answer that you get will depend on the person that you ask, or the person that fills in the form on it. And 4 of them will give you the wrong answer. And just for the avoidance of doubt, the best football team in Birmingham is the one holding the trophy for the Carling Cup, Birmingham City, not the one in the bottom, which the other 4 may inadvertently have advised you. Just because we live in the same street as other people doesn't mean that we agree with them about what our neighbourhood should look like. So, for example, there are some who will oppose traffic calming on the grounds that it slows cars down as they move along the road. There are also some who support it for exactly the same reason. They may live next door to each other, but their views are different. They don't think the same. And in terms of planning, the overwhelming majority of those who respond to local plan and planning application consultation, sorry, I've got my words muddled up. In terms of planning, the overwhelming majority of those consulted on a local plan or planning application will not respond. For many, this is a choice. It simply takes time to read the documentation and to pen a response. And this has to be weighed against other priorities in life and the degree of the impact that they think their comments might bring about. In other words, will they be listened to? And of those that do respond, then more often than not, They are the older, educated, time-rich, white, and dare I say it, male. Now, their views may be representative, but how do you know? And I had a quick look at an entirely random local planning authority in the North West to get the feel for the response rates to a local plan consultation. And I picked out the hat Salford. And before I should go any further, what I want to say is that before I go any further, that what follows is a little bit better than what I found elsewhere when I've done a similar thing. So well done, Salford. The draft local plan consultation, which was done in November 2016 and January 2017, attracted 648 responses. Population of Salford is just over 250,000. Quick bit of maths tells you that the 648 responses equates to 0.26% of the local population. Now, even if you assume those under 11 wouldn't respond anyway, and yes, we should ask children for their views because it's their future we're planning for, and there will always be children, this is pretty poor. And I actually ask you, how many other businesses would take decisions on the future of their product based on a consultation response rate of less than 1%? Very few, if any. What would they do? Representative or not, and they would do that before taking any decisions. So why don't we? So when people say we all think the same, let's ask them, how do you know? Similarly, let's ensure that those claiming to represent the local community have themselves reached out to capture the diversity of that community before expressing a community view. And one of the best responses to a consultation just there I've seen came from a town council who did just that and then expressed their comments by saying that whilst a majority of people thought X, there were also views of Y and Z. So let's consign the phrases we all think the same and the community view is to room 101.
Thank you, Sue. Thank you for that emotive delivery. And I think that's exactly what I'd hoped. And our speakers this evening are not disappointing us in giving us our views straight down the barrel, as it were. I think it was. I must admit I wasn't quite sure at one point where you were going with that conversation. But actually, the very idea that we do, and it comes up all the time in planning. You know, oh, we've done a survey and the community's view is this. Well, not everybody in that community thought that, and we tend to go with this idea of perhaps what is known as the vocal minority, and they seem to have an uncharacteristically large sway on the way that we make decisions. Kind of links to some of the conversations we might have been having with John, that you know about the way that the planning system works. John, Rachel, Sam, anything to add? Anything to dispute?
I totally agree with Sue, actually, Bob, because I unfortunately live in Stockport, and every day I get emails from the Lib Dems saying how wonderful it is that we've come out of the GMSF and how wonderful it is that we're going to save this biodiversity desert called High Lane. Well, it absolutely makes me mad. We need to stay in the GMSF, and this is not my view. It is not my view of what I wanted from Stockport. I wanted those housing sites. And yet they just assume that the whole of Stockport is exactly the same. So I totally agree, Sue. I'm moving house.
Come to Warrington, Rachel.
I'd love to, John. Find me a house.
Okay. No, I was going to say, I think, but that's our fault, isn't it? It's us not doing the job properly that's caused that, and it's just allowing that process over time to have been able to become so entrenched in the way we do things and just following that same old path, and there's no imagination in it anymore. And that's government as well, isn't it? Because the government restricts us in all sorts of ways from doing things. It's the legal profession which makes us all frightened of making decisions which will be challenged. But ultimately, the problem with that is us. And I've found it really good to work with some local community groups and try and find a way where they can influence that decision-making process, and where they can not be seen as bog standard NIMBYs and all white 55-year-old males. And it's really quite exciting when you get into that and find different ways of challenging the process, and we need more of that.
Sue, anything to add from your position?
Sorry, you cut out. I missed all of that.
Sorry, Sue. I said, is there anything that you want to add to this topic?
I think really, to me, it's about engaging with the diversity of the community and making sure we actually hear from all those voices, because we're planning for everybody. That's what it's about. Planning is for people, and it's for people's children, the children going on. You know, the decisions we take are so important, and they will last well beyond our lives.
And Bob, we should be able to get into schools and things like that. And I know the RTPI has tried that, but we tried it around here, and they just say curriculum doesn't allow us to do it. It's too tight. We haven't got the time to do it. And you're absolutely right. We need to really break through that, and find ways in so we can talk to kids and say, planning's fantastic. It's really a brilliant thing to get involved with. And it involves you as well, and it will involve you for the rest of your life, and get involved with it.
I must admit what you say there, John, is my recollection, and for my sins, one of the things that I seem to have been involved in, not so much now, but perhaps in the last 5 years, I've done a few neighbourhood plans, like them or loathe them. It was interesting, and I've learned an awful lot from doing them. But I found that where you've got the time and the resources to either go into the schools, go into some of the community, go and just, you know, rather than waiting for people to come to you, you have to go to them. And if you can do, and you start talking about planning, and you start talking about what we do, they go, oh, that's absolutely fascinating. Why have we never heard about this before? You know, why has nobody ever told us about the planning system? I don't know. It's been about since 1940s, whenever. You know, it's existed all of your lifetime. You know, why? You know, but we don't teach it in schools. We don't teach, you know, the fact that we don't sort of. It kind of falls as an element of citizenship often, and you know. It is an amazing oversight, I think. Sam, do you have anything that you want to add on this topic before I hand over to you as the last speaker?
Thanks, Bob. I'm sorry if you heard my phone just before. It's a great point. I guess what Sue's getting at is the generalisation of those kind of approaches, and I don't know, maybe. I think going back to kind of what I was saying before, there is so much, and what John was saying about neighbourhood plans. There's so much at stake. It's so adversarial that arguably, you know, one block is then almost incentivized to over accentuate the points that they're making, while at the same time, as Sue said, the actual engagement is so low. But then there's so much at stake, at least in their eyes. And again, linking back to the point I was making before about planning committees, there's this point of principle. This is what I get to speak to Rachel's point about the GMSF. I've been writing about the GMSF all day, which is why I noticed I'm the only person drinking. I think by the look of it, but I was, after reading and writing about the GMSF all day, I was ready for a beer at 5 o'clock. But there's a tier of democracy at which, you know, appropriate decision. There's a tiering of democratic decision making at which the seriousness, if you like, of decision making should be taken. And when you've got decisions of a greater than local scale being able to be taken by local councillors, you generate that kind of brouhaha. And when you have neighbourhood plans that feel emboldened to deal with principles rather than necessarily design and accessibility and all, you know, those kind of things, then you're encouraging people to perhaps over accentuate their positions because they feel as if that's what's, you know, there's so much at stake that they need to. I don't know, that was a bit of a waffle. You put me on the spot there, Bob.
No, that's all right, Sam. I think you actually came across very clearly there, and I think it was a very cognizant point actually to sort of draw that debate together. So thank you for answering there and participating in that one. So I think it leaves me really, Sam, to introduce you as our last speaker. You know, I'll let you introduce your background, but really, I was trying to think about how best to describe your topic that you're going to deliver to us, and I use this image of a tidal wave of information overwhelming that poor little green person that sat in my image. So perhaps you can introduce your topic, tell us a little bit about yourself, and let us know what you want to put in Room 101. Thank you, Bob.
Thanks to the RTPI for the opportunity. It looks like I'm sat on a dining room chair, but I'm actually sat on Sam's soapbox, which, if you have listened to one of my podcasts, you might know that I, from time to time, do get out Sam's soapbox and have a bit of a whinge. I mean, speaking to your point, Bob, I'm probably developing a theme that you mentioned has been mentioned previously on in the series about local authority websites, which I'll come to. So it probably speaks to some of the themes that we've picked up on tonight about the accessibility of the system, less necessarily the information, and more the way in which it's presented. So I'll come on to that. As far as I'm concerned, what can I say? Work for Barratt Developments, been a planning consultant mostly, strategic land at Barratt for 6 years. If anybody doesn't know who I am or what I do. So I was, yeah, it did actually take me a while to pin down what I was going to talk about this evening, because there are plenty of elements of the planning system that I would happily consign to Room 101. But in narrowing it down, I jettisoned the things that I thought it might be unfair to place the blame solely at planners' doors for. As we've discussed just now, planning is fundamentally a political endeavour, and the rules of the game that we play are ultimately decided by politicians. And as I want to say, if we are all but actors in a play, then ultimately the director is a politician. So it seemed a little bit unfair then for me to have a moan about things like the provision of affordable homes for social rent, the bending of local development schemes to fit local election timetables, and the deliberate obfuscation around the role of Greenbelt, where ultimately these are political choices reflective of political calculations. So I have chosen something for which, and I stand to be corrected, but I think is the sole responsibility of the head of a planning service within a local planning authority, and that is, as I alluded to previously, the impenetrability of the planning services website to the layperson. And I did share with Bev an image, as Sue did. I don't know if she's got something. Yeah, there we go. Thanks, Bev. It seems to me one of the most welcome and least contentious elements of the white paper is the drive for a radical digital-first approach to modernise the planning process and move from a process-based engagement, process-based on documents, to a process driven by data. Whilst the parameters for a national standard of civic engagement for both plans and decision-making can only be set nationally, I am curious, and have been curious, as to what has been stopping LPAs going further right now, with, for example, open accessible data sets, as well as improving the user experience for the general public. I struggle to comprehend what must be the prevailing culture of an organisation that sees images like those on the left of your screen as being in any way acceptable. Either the service head does not know that things like this are happening, or they do not care. Either those responsible for uploading material in this way know that it is impenetrable to the point of being pointless and choose not to rattle any cages, or they have no idea why they are doing it in the first place. None of these scenarios can be justifiable. I always smile wryly when an authority's website will have a vacuous slogan somewhere on the homepage along the lines of putting our residents first, and the planning pages look like this. I'm not sure how such bold corporate declarations can be squared with a culture that is content simply that planning application material is online rather than how it is online and why it is online. Imagine for a second that you are a member of the public with no previous contact with the planning system, as we've just been talking about. You manage to find out about an application, which is probably secondhand if your house is on the street that does not immediately adjoin the application site, and so you don't get a letter directly, and your dog walk does not take you past the lamppost that for a limited time will have a laminated piece of A4 paper attached to it. You've managed to find the planning application search facility, and you've managed, more by luck than judgment, to find the application. This then is what you are faced with. What are you supposed to think? You're going to think something like, this is a done deal. It's going to happen. They can't want my views because they don't want me to see anything. It's
30 seconds, Sam.
Oh, you're joking. That one aggrieved person will no doubt share that view with everybody they know, either in the pub or on Facebook, and just like that, the reputation of the poor development management officer, the whole planning team, the whole council, and indeed the whole planning system has been sullied. That, to my mind, is emblematic of a lazy, box-ticking approach to planning that probably isn't that bothered about putting residents first, and actually wouldn't mind if nobody commented on that planning application, because that would make it easier to process. The government could spend millions on a radical digital-first approach to modernise the planning process, but if that attitude prevails, what would be the point? I would like to consign, therefore, both impenetrable lists of PDFs and the attitudes that allow them to Room 101. Thank you, Chair. Sorry if I got too close to 5 minutes.
That's perfect, Sam. Thank you very much. And what a way to finish. Spectacular, and thank you for keeping to time. Thoughts from my other colleagues on Sam's, as I would call it, table thumping speech there. John.
I mean, perhaps I'm in a better position than most of the others on the panel, because I've sat there and had to sort out local authority websites and engage software providers and all the rest of it to actually set them up, and it's horrible. It's really hard work, if not impossible, and most of the time it's not in your control to the way it's set up. It's because you have to buy a package that's already formulated, and you can't adapt it and you can't change it, because that's the cheapest, and the cost will come in, and it's another one of those resource things, I'm afraid, that you get what you pay for. And I think from where I sit now, I share the frustration with the idea, and there's lots of authorities that you think, oh, why does it have to be that difficult? But I can look back and think, well, I kind of know why that's the case, because you can't just sit down and update it every 6 months, because there's not the resource to do it, particularly the human resource. A lot of the time the decisions are made by people who have nothing to do with the planning process and don't understand it, and there's not the opportunity for the planners who perhaps understand it to engage. So I get the idea, but I can understand why it happens.
Thanks, John. Anybody else? Sue, Rachel?
Yeah, I think you absolutely hit the nail on the head, both of you there. Firstly, something like that really puts people off planning. It's impenetrable, isn't it? If we want to actually engage with people, we've got to make it accessible. We've got to make it interesting. No one will give up time to do something as impenetrable and difficult as trying to work their way through something like that. But the other key point is resources, and that's absolutely fundamental. And RTPI, probably seen, have been doing a lot of work this year. There's a research report came out in October, which is about measuring the value of planning in terms of outcomes rather than in terms of we've built this number of houses or processed this number of applications within a certain time. And it is about resources. And if we're going to digitalise, we've got to put the resources in. So there was a big ask went in as part of the CSR. from RTPI, 500 million over 4 years. And hopefully that if the CSR comes through in our, we get that obviously, and who knows, then we can start to address things like this. But we have to.
Yeah, I'm sympathetic with Sam, because on the other side of the coin, as a consultant, I have to find information out from these websites, and often the client says to me, "Oh, I haven't got much information, but here's the planning reference number," and then they haven't even labelled any of the reports. It's just report, report, report. It takes me hours to go through and open each one. So yeah, I totally sympathise.
There are some good ones though, and I think there's a problem that maybe we don't learn from the good, and
Yeah.
there's perhaps something there where I mean, I've been looking at Warrington and Liverpool today, and if you take some bits from Liverpool and some bits from Warrington, probably together there'd be a usable system, whereas perhaps they're marginally so at the moment. We need a vehicle to do that.
The interesting thing I always find is, and I think a lot of this, perhaps, ladies and gentlemen, might be the fault of the planning portal, who has a file size limit. And the amount of times that I've taken a document off, even something as simple as an architect's design and access statement, which they've done properly, lots of drawings, lots of diagrams in it, and it comes in as a hefty 30 megabytes, and you end up splitting it into 4 bits so you can upload it. And so people can download it, and I think I agree a little bit with what Sam's saying. I think we need a complete overhaul of how we deal with digital planning. That's very on message for the RTPI this year, but I think it's a good point. I've had a few questions that have come in on the chat, so maybe I can put a few of them to you as the panel, ladies and gentlemen. One of the first question I've got here is for Sue, but I think all of you might have something to add to this given the topic. How do we see the planning system adapting to better involve younger people, say under 18s? If you could say one thing that you would do to try and improve it, ladies and gentlemen, what would that be? I'll come to Sue first, and then perhaps others.
Can I say 2, please?
Go on.
Right, the first one is we've got to get out there in the schools, and we've got the planning ambassadors. We really have got to get out there and we will infuse people. The one I wanted to add, though, is a piece of work that the RTPI are looking at, and that's to look at the areas where we don't get planners typically coming from. So it's looking at the diversity of our own profession, and then targeting our ambassadors to actually go to the schools in those areas. So that's a project that's underway as part of the corporate strategy.
Interesting. Thoughts, Sam, John, Brayden?
Blimey. I think the digitisation piece would have a lot to do with that. Who's got the time to sit and look through newspaper? With new notifications are still in newspapers. I mean, it's if you live in an area, you should be getting, you can get alerts on your phone if an application goes in within 500 metres of where you live or something. I don't know. And I do quite like the idea in the white paper of looking at a piece of land and knowing upstreaming through a local plan what it should be used, what it could be used for. I think if that was the kind of conversation that was being had, if neighbourhood plans were doing what they were supposed to be doing, and that fed into whatever kind of these 3 designations emerge, I think there's a lot of merit, and that would give you the ability to perhaps engage with people upstream and say, what should this land be used for? Beyond that, it's the profile. I mean, I personally would absolutely love to be the head of planning of one of our major towns or cities. Now, there's a lot of reasons why I'm not, but the point being that should be a role to which people aspire to. It should be a high-profile role in the same way that heads of planning in some of our, you could go on Twitter and find the head of planning of Auckland or Vancouver or cities like that, and that's linked to a broader cultural, our sense of civic administration, and the fact that councils are so hamstrung in what they can and can't do means that heads of planning are so hamstrung in what they can and can't do. But that job, the head of planning, should be a job to which every every planner aspires because of the influence that they can have. But it's not, and that's a shame.
But that picks up on the point that's I know current as well, that the head of planning is 3 or 4 tiers down the rung in the management setup of the local authority. So you sit there and you might have the job title, but you're got 3 reportees before you get anywhere near exec boards and management committees of local authorities. So having sat there, it's very, you go and sit in your corner and process a few more applications a bit more quickly, please. It's not really about necessarily being able to have that corporate influence. So I think that's it is a great place to sit, but the role has lost some of its shine and polish that it might once had, because people have pushed it down, and more often than not you'll report into a director of growth somewhere whose only objective is to increase the volume of business rates and council tax and new homes bonus and all the rest of it that he can drive out of the system.
It's interesting you're mentioning that, John, and I was just thinking, as a segue to everybody, in the first Room 101 we had Jane Meek from Carlisle on. And Jane does sit at the top table as I forget what her title is, but she's a planner who sits in the executive committee, and it's a very different conversation that we've had there. So for people that are interested in that, go back and watch our original Room 101. There's a plug for the videos.
Cumbria is really good because, I mean, there's a couple of chief execs in Cumbria who are planners as well. So for some reason, Cumbria must have a different DNA towards having the right people at the top of the tree.
Excellent. What I'm thinking now is I'm very conscious of time, and I want to, we do need to finish. What I am going to do is I'm going to come back to each of you in a moment for almost a one-liner pitch. But before we do that, I'm going to ask our technical team if they can put up a poll and ask the audience if they can vote on who they would put into Room 101. So we'll give you a few minutes to do that, and I will just recap on that, and it'll also give our speakers a little bit of time to think about what their final idea or final leaving comment might be before we decide what we're going to put into Room 101. So, ladies and gentlemen of the audience, who are you going to put in? John Groves and his planning committees, Rachel, biodiversity net gain, Sue and we all think the same, Sam and his impenetrability of planning and the digital requirements. So give you a few seconds there. We'll give. I'm on my watch now. I'll give you another 15 seconds. I'd love at this point to have some countdown music, but I couldn't afford that in the budget. So you'll just have to have my do 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 do. Ooh! Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Can you finish the poll? And do we know the results of that poll? Here it comes. I'm hoping. So whilst I'm just waiting to see what the audience have voted with, let me go round each of you, sort of a one-sentence final thought and why we should put your topic into Room 101. So, John.
It's too late now. I've probably already won. Solving the committee would solve Sue's issues and Sam's issues.
Oh, that's interesting. There's the poll results on the screen for everybody. Thanks, John. Rachel, why should we put yours into Room 101? Because bearing in mind, I have the final decision, so it's not just the audience.
Because how can we design really important development sites, commercial sites and residential sites based on what a calculator churns out? We shouldn't be doing this. We should be designing them on landscape and bat boxes and bird boxes and species-rich habitats, not a calculator.
Thank you. So why should we put your topic into Room 101?
Quite simply, we do not all think the same. Not everyone in Birmingham supports Aston Villa.
And Sam, will you round us off with your final pitch?
This is interesting, Bob, because what you're saying is that you've engaged the audience, but you ultimately can decide, this speaks to localism. This speaks to the technocratic, autocratic nature of planning and the extent to which people actually, you want to engage people, which is the point that I was making I think those websites are just emblematic of lazy thinking, and it's something that as John said, some authorities do it well, some do it really poorly, but the impact of doing it poorly, I think, is exponentially larger than the cost of doing something about it, on the basis that you'd end up with more. You could conceivably in the short term end up with better contributions to planning applications and a better reputation of the planning system in the round. So I think the people don't know anything, Bob. That's why referendums, elections, democracy doesn't work. I think you should, use your autocratic whip hand and vote Stafford for a vote for common sense.
Thank you, Sam. It is, and I think tonight has been emblematic as the entire series that we've found there's been so much overlap between topics that it's been really nice for me to see that there is a body of sort of common acceptance between those of us working in this profession who are all feeling equal parts frustrated, excited, energized, and slightly downtrodden all at the same time. And that also makes it really difficult. And I do take Sam's point that the audience have spoken quite clearly, and it was quite close. As you all saw, 27% for John, Rachel, and Sam, equal there. Can't quite see that yellow, but Sue clearly in the lead. And I think I have some sympathy as well with that. That if we are going to change planning, we do need to think about how we're doing better engagement and moving away from this idea of we all think the same. So I'm going to go with the audience, and I'm going to decide that we're going to put Sue's topic, all thinking the same, into room 101. That has nothing to do with the fact that she's the president of the RTPI.
Don't believe you.
and that I feel that if I'd done anything else, pulling rank. But yes, so that's it. But that just leaves me to thank all of our speakers for this evening. You've all been wonderful. Thank you so much for giving up your time and your evenings. Just to remind everybody, this is the last one. And thank you to Bev and Joanne behind the scenes who have kept everything running, to Kim for her introduction, and to everybody else that's been involved. I hope you all have a wonderful Christmas. And I would say travel safely home. Sam, travel safely back to the sofa again after that beer. Ladies and gentlemen, this has been Room 101. My name's been Bob Phillips. Good night.